Aloha, Rep. Quinlan. Thank you for joining us today with our digital talk story at Transform Hawaii Government. It's nice to see you.
Christine, good morning. It's a pleasure.
Good morning. And thank you for joining us via Zoom. We're really happy to have you. And one of the things that we're doing in this series is just really taking the time to talk to state leadership about the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on the community and access to government services. So one question that I have is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the delivery of government services that you've experienced or that your community has experienced?
Well, for some sectors of government, it really hasn't impacted it that much. And we have learned that there are a lot of things that we can do remotely, even at the legislature. We had all of our committee hearings live on YouTube this year. People were able to participate remotely via Zoom. And it's interesting because for years, a lot of the neighbor island reps and senators have been asking for remote testimony because it's a real hassle to have to fly all the way from Maui or the Big Island just to sit in a room for 2 hours, give your 2 minutes of testimony, and then fly back home. So, I think in a way you could argue that the old system, to some extent, disenfranchised our neighbor island residents because they were just unable to participate as easily as Oahu folks. But even for people on Oahu, for one of my constituents to take basically a whole day off of work, drive an hour and a half from Laie all the way down to the Capitol to testify, it's really, really tough. And it's a barrier to participation in government. So I hope that now that we have this new system, it won't go away and we'll continue to allow remote testimony because I think it's fair, it's just, and it costs basically nothing to the state.
Yeah.
But you have seen areas where clearly COVID had a huge impact on delivery of services. And I don't want to pick on the Department of Labor, but our unemployment insurance system was wholly inadequate to the task. And ironically, the Department of Labor was in the middle of modernizing its database and its computer system when COVID hit. And I think that office, the unemployment insurance office, went from about 7 to 8 full-time employees, and it quickly ballooned up to 400 in a matter of weeks. And 400 wasn't enough, and 500 wasn't enough. And we hired companies from the mainland to answer the phone calls. And the database the Department of Labor is using, it runs on a programming language that was invented before I was born. It's probably like Fortran or COBOL or something like this. And it got to the point where, because the federal government kept rolling out these new programs, when we wanted to switch applicants from the current UI system to the new federal program, we're literally taking a piece of paper over to a mainframe and manually typing in their information for 250,000 people. That's just wild. And I think it shows, when you have poor IT infrastructure and you don't have the ability to scale up, you'll always be at risk of unexpected events like this, absolutely paralyzing a section of your government.
Yeah, thank you for that. And do you feel like, what are some of the lessons learned from that? It's oftentimes when it comes to government technology, it's not very exciting to perhaps the average citizen until they actually have to engage in the service. And you're right, the pandemic has really shown us where some of the cracks are in government infrastructure, like the unemployment insurance system. So do you feel like there's more momentum behind investing in government modernization now? And what did that look like at the end of the last session and then heading into the next one?
I would really hope so, but our approach historically has been somewhat haphazard, which is, Department of Taxation needs a new computer system. Well, we'll just work on DOE tax. Oh, now DLIR needs one. Well, different vendor, different system. Rather than hiring one vendor, one company to look at every aspect of our state IT infrastructure, and I hate using the word holistically because it's just so overused, but it is one gigantic system. And when all these systems are in their own silo and they can't talk to each other, it's a huge loss of efficiency.
Yeah. And so what do you think needs to happen, or what can we do as a community member that sits outside of state government? Transform Hawaii Government works with a lot of nonprofits who works with a lot of constituents in the community, and we really kind of work together to help improve access to government services. Knowing that the systems can be fragmented, what do you think we can do to really kind of break that mold of the fragmentation and start to kind of integrate things together?
And you make a great point. You're right. It's one of those things that you don't think about until you need the service.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my favorite stories I ever heard on NPR, there's this mayor of a mid-sized city in Indonesia, and in Indonesia, a mid-sized city is like 12 million people, right? And he came from the private sector. And when he got into office, he realized that basically all of the city services were having trouble, even simple things like garbage pickup. So what he did was he created apps for your phone, because everybody in Indonesia has a smartphone, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may not have a computer, but they have a smartphone. So for every single city service, they created an application where the residents could quickly and easily access a service. So you need bulky garbage pickup, there's an app for that. Your neighbor's house is on fire, there's an app for that, and everything in between. And I think that's where we need to get to a certain extent. And the excuse has always been, well, there's a segment of the population that just cannot use this technology. But we can just keep rolling that excuse forward for the next 100 years if we want to. We don't just bite the bullet and jump off the deep end. And I hope that the electorate demands of us that we join the 21st century. Because without that demand, even politicians, like a few years ago at the legislature, we got the opportunity to go paperless. Because there are certain times of year, if you're not paperless, where the clerk's office will drop a stack of papers about 2 feet high on your desk, and it's bills and it's resolutions and everything else. So it's an opt-in. Mm-hmm. And there are still probably, 10, 15, maybe 20% of the legislature that still wants those big, thick stacks of paper, right? So a lot of the same people that are making the decisions on whether or not to modernize are ones who maybe don't see the need to modernize because they're fine just doing everything. They would prefer to do everything on paper. And I understand that. And it's, getting my own parents to modernize their use of technology it's up and down. I mean, I literally have to drive to my mother's house if she wants to install a new app on her iPhone. We just can't seem to figure it out on the phone. I have to go physically and be present. So I get it, but we've built out all this 4G and now 5G infrastructure. We're building out all this broadband. And I think it would be a shame not to take advantage of the capacity that we're building by making government more accessible to the average citizen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And, thank you for, you represent the North Shore, Ko'olauloa and Ko'olaupoku, and that's outside of downtown Honolulu. Have your constituents expressed and shared some of the challenges that they've had during the pandemic in terms of accessing government services? Is it as you've described, or have there been other cases?
Well, I'm in a unique situation because everybody in my district has my cell phone number. So,
so they call you.
So they have a lot of access to their government, actually. But yeah, I mean, just a ton of frustration from folks who, we're supposed to be getting unemployment insurance, or we're supposed to be receiving PUA benefits, and we're totally eligible and just weren't receiving them because of computer errors. And literally the only person they could get on the phone was me. And I couldn't get anybody on the phone a lot of times to address their concerns. All I had was an email Dropbox that I submitted requests to, and sometimes they got taken care of, and sometimes, they didn't. Yeah. So there are so many services that my constituents find difficult to access. And while the answer is not always complete modernization, that's usually a big part of the reason why the services are not adequate.
With all this talk about workforce development and a digital economy, do you see opportunities for supporting the state workforce, or are there any initiatives that you're aware of that kind of addresses that moving forward?
Well, okay, here I'm going to get myself in really big trouble. But part of the problem with our state government is that we have too many workers that aren't getting paid enough. So because of the compensation, we're not attracting the best people in their field. And we seem to have tried to solve that problem by just adding more positions. I went to go get a new registration for my car the other day, and she printed something out on an old printer, and then she fed it into a typewriter and typed some stuff up, and then she scanned it, presumably to go into a computer database. I wasn't really sure. Yeah. And that's just one example.
If there's nothing that I learned from working with Transform Hawaii government, is that a lot of the state workforce are committed to their jobs, love being in public service. And so how can we support not only, their transformation into, digital jobs, upskilling or reskilling, the same thing that it has to happen in the private sector, hopefully will also happen in the public sector too, as the whole workforce has an opportunity to leverage technology to move forward. So how can we really, support that? Yeah.
I'm not sure if maybe I'm just a contrarian by nature, but I have serious concerns about workforce redevelopment and reskilling. I've just seen it fail in so many places and for so many reasons. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's very difficult to take,
yeah.
Somebody who's in their 40s, 50s, or 60s potentially, and have them reskill into the modern workforce. It's messy, and I do want to make it clear that when we're talking about modernization, that messiness is because we're dealing with real people and real jobs, and every position that technology eliminates is somebody's mother or father or grandmother or son. So we really do have to be cognizant of the human cost, but I don't think that's necessarily should be the reason why we hold back on trying to innovate.
Transform Hawaii government has been a supporter of the new financial management system modernization work. And thank you to the legislature for allowing or for funding $17 million to fund a new accounting system within the Department of Accounting and General Services. But also that system will connect to all the other systems in the state. So hopefully at the end of 3 years, the fragmentation that exists in financial management across the state will be unified. And some of the challenges that you're talking about as we transition to a more digital economy are going to be within that. So I look forward to working with you and other members of the legislature, and how can we get the right skills within the departments that are going to be using the new system and also new processes, so that you will have access to financial data on projects that are of interest to you and your constituents when and where needed. And so that's an opportunity for us.
No, absolutely. And in terms of government transparency, there's no reason why one of my constituents shouldn't be able to look up any construction project in the state, review who bid on it, who won the bid, what the cost is, what the timeline is. Actually, if people would do that, it would save me a lot of work, because then they wouldn't have to call me, right?
Really calling you, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. We are about up at time, and appreciate the conversation that we've had together. Really enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully you have a good July 4th weekend.
Thanks, Christine. Great talking to you too.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.